Neon Night Forever by Tomasz Zagluski. Closing remarks, or we're going to need a bigger cave. Despite the negative overtone of Kevin Feige's assertion with which this analysis started, it is quite evident today that the anti-Schumacher trend is reversing, both in the reception of the audience with their newly found appreciation, and in the rising wave in modern superhero filmmaking, which seems to draw increasingly on the neon-saturated idea of the living comic book, instead of the post-Nolan visualization of caped crusaders in their practical or realistic costumes. Even with Feige's own conceptual oeuvre of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the most eminent recent achievements appear to have more in common with the over-the-top instances of the aesthetic of artifice, once rejected by the MCU's main man. Financially successful and artistically acclaimed, both of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy features from 2014 and 2017, alongside Taika Waititi's take on Thor in Thor Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder, are genuine continuators of Joel Schumacher's concept of making comic books come alive through the aesthetic of excess and overall visual brightness. In the preface to the sumptuous album The Art of Guardians of the Galaxy by Marie Javins, James Gunn himself highlights the core idea of bringing the comic book essence of the Guardians of the Galaxy to the big screen by means of openly overdone and stylized production. According to Gunn, quote, "At first it was mostly a visual thing. Alien and Blade Runner are groundbreaking films, but so many science fiction films have been entombed by them, relying on darkness and grittiness to make them real. Guardians of the Galaxy would be about color and life. In-your-face, over-the-top, unrepentant color. We would rescue the aesthetics of pulpy science fiction films from the 50s and 60s. End quote. Indeed, it would not be that difficult to replace the title of Gunn's space superhero epic with Schumacher's duology and find the very same inspiration and intention, which consists of amplifying light elements in the fairly narrow, pre-established visual paradigm of the genre in question. This intention flourishes in the sequel to the 2014 Marvel cosmic blockbuster, as the director once again openly affirms his reliance on even brighter themes and imagery. Quote, "I wanted it to be more explosively colorful, more outlandishly science fiction, and more rooted in pulp art and the space opera films. I put together a lookbook of visual cues containing old Amazing Stories covers, Al Williamson and Jim Starlin art, frames from the 1980s Flash Gordon and Wong Kar-wai films." End quote. Adding a significant remark about one of the film's locations, quote, "And like Las Vegas, often there's neon. It's a lure to get people in." End quote. References to aesthetic exaggeration, manifesting in the surreal geographies and set designs, outlandish color palette, and expressive filmmaking techniques are also often made with respect to Taika Waititi's vision for a high-value Marvel asset in the shape of 2 Thor installments, which derive substantial inspiration from Jack Kirby's drawing style. Eleni Russo's behind-the-scenes look at Thor Ragnarok features a quote from Kevin Feige, who admits that it played no mean role. Quote, "In this particular movie, Taika had an idea to just really make it a tribute and take it as close as we could get to his design style from the comics, and not just use them for tonal inspiration. And the lines that you see are in many cases taken directly from his panels. It's almost a surreal experience walking around, as if we had family, after so many years, stepped into a Jack Kirby drawing." End quote. There are more projects that seem very keen on maintaining this unrealistic and opulent vibe of on-screen superhero exploits in the recent DC catalog, with the most obvious example being James Wan's Aquaman, which follows the same pattern of exploiting artifice over reality. When the creators of that hit blockbuster took advantage of the bioluminescent aesthetic to depict the underwater kingdom of Atlantis, their goal was not to concretize the practicality of the vehicles used by the Atlanteans or their abodes, but go for the extravagant aspect, drenched in underwater neons. Quote, "As a result, everything in Atlantis shimmers and glows. Functionality was as important as visual flair." End quote. Still, even in the latest reintroduction of Batman's character in Matt Reeves' The Batman, there were perceptible nods towards the once disavowed legacy of the ridiculed Neon Knight. For a time, Christopher Nolan's visually practical Dark Knight trilogy predominated with its almost semi-documentary style in Chicago-like Gotham City, but The Batman seems to depart from that stylistic formula. It does share certain Nolan-esque conceptual solutions in terms of imagery, but it opts for a much more flamboyant visual and music setting. As Matt Reeves' entry into the franchise was discussed in various media, Schumacher's adherents would note that it was prominently reminiscent of the 1995 and 1997 idea of aesthetic excess. While praising the work of Greg Fraser, the cinematographer in The Batman, it was commonly observed that with his touch, Gotham feels like a living, breathing Gothic city, with neon signage and streetlights. Indeed, the 2022 Gotham City demonstrates some similarities with Schumacher's over-aestheticized neon urban jungle, deliberately exploiting the light patterns and neon blasts to achieve the expressionistic feel of a city space that has no interest in becoming too artistically limited due to the requirements of realism. In the art book to accompany the film, director Matt Reeves refers to the expressionistic lighting techniques to explain its nearly aggressive effect on the viewer's perception. Quote, "Light has always been a critical and deeply emotional part of the image to me, and Greg is the master of light. We used these wonderfully imperfect anamorphic lenses. Greg's whole approach is about finding ways to bring texture into the overly clean digital image so it has a much more film-like quality." End quote. The same applies to the auditory aspect, as the sound design and score by Michael Giacchino also pursue the immersion through exaggeration approach. Quote, "Almost nothing you hear in a film like this is a reflection of reality. The sound is almost entirely impressionistic and expressionistic. The idea is to create a sound that feels right to the audience, not one that would be accurate if closely examined." End quote. All the above examples may be presumed to reflect a triumphant return of the neon type of filmmaking, in which creators explore theatricality and graphic-like possibilities of showing superhero exploits on screen, rather than restricting them to probable interpretations of the originally improbable figures and heroes. This aesthetic of artifice, manifested in Schumacher's depictions of Batman, finds new applications today, as a number of filmmakers readily embrace cinematic comic bookness as a multisensory experience, amplifying all audiovisual components to obtain an eye-riveting pictorial pageant. However, the Neon Knight left an imprint on more essential ingredients of the modern spectacles, such as Guardians of the Galaxy or The Batman. These aesthetically post-neon features appear to follow in the trespassing footsteps of Schumacher, going against the expectations nurtured by the erstwhile formula of the superhero story. It is thus no coincidence that Gunn's space opera is more a fully developed family story than a typical Caped Crusader-themed narrative in a cosmic setting, while its main protagonist, Peter Quill, is a somewhat helpless man-child, despite his adequately manly physique, and profound dependency on his relationship with other members of the Guardian Squad. Likewise, Waititi's reimagined Thor is remote from the original depictions of the mythical figure, shifting towards more personally tragic as well as comedic, undermining the seriousness of the character. Moreover, Waititi decided to take Thor's character beyond the realm of typical superhero affairs and give him a foster daughter to raise in the unexpected finale of the 2022 Thor: Love and Thunder. This closing character twist and the overall unbalanced tone of Waititi's second Thor feature drew some backlash from the fans, and it is striking how closely this resembles the concerns regarding Schumacher's earlier meddling with Batman's personality by de-traumatizing it in Batman and Robin. The latest iteration of The Dark Knight conceived by Reeves conveys an implicit commentary about the ineffective fixation with brooding characters, as the hero's journey in The Batman starts with Bruce Wayne defining himself as a nocturnal animal who brutally preys on Gotham City's bandits, and ends with the same Batman working hand in hand with the city's enforcement during the daytime, as he helps a young woman by taking her gently by the hand. With the sequels to Reeves' The Batman already announced, there is a strong possibility that the subsequent stories will move even further away from The Dark Knight, making new attempts to broaden Batman's conceptual scope to, metaphorically, paint his iconic cowl in a different color palette as a token of willingness to move once again towards the Bright Knight interpretation. The line cited in the title of this conclusion originates from the very last scene of Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin, a heartwarming and highly significant shot featuring Batman, Robin, and the newly inducted Batgirl, who now form an official alliance and partnership. Alfred comments astutely, "We're going to need a bigger cave." In line with what I have tried to show in my analysis, the final message from Schumacher's feature may also be perceived as a much more metatextual remark on Batman and superhero-centered narratives, since the director's personal need for artistic trespassing manifested clearly in those two materializations of the Neon Knight. Schumacher's striving for an aesthetic and conceptual opening of the Batman lore, as well as expansion of the visual forms and character modalities, ultimately translates into a call for encouraging and accepting all possible counterfactual and/or counter-aesthetic ideas about the Batman persona. Importantly, they would thus be equally valuable and meaningful for a fair number of Bat fans and followers who discover their own reifications of the character in those unorthodox visions and understandings. The bigger cave creed is a powerful reminder from Schumacher to see such fictional superheroes as true floating signifiers, entities that do not have to stick to just one primary iteration, but may and should seek their unobvious variations. The outcomes may happen to be unwelcome to some, but they will be thematically progressive and culturally inclusive, finding an audience all the same. This appeal for a bigger cave that can accommodate all Batmen and Batwomen out there, whatever their shape, tone, and cowl color may be, constitutes the most crucial element of Joel Schumacher's legacy, in which his Neon Knight is a thoroughly viable proposal in the continually developing Batman phenomenon. As a result, there is still work to be done within the discourse focusing on Schumacher and his Neon Vigilante, as well as regarding the infinite other knights that are already seen or will come to be seen through multiple potential readings by the creators and consumers of all related Bat media. Since the necessity of exploring such creations as part of Batman and superhero studies is as inevitable as it is promising, one should perhaps recall the sound advice that Dr. Chase Meridian offers at the end of Batman Forever, Schumacher's first step to address the need for a bigger cave. Don't work too late. This concludes the reading of Neon Knight Forever,